Hello everyone, and welcome to Teacher Webinar 2, Supporting Students to Learn from Mistakes. Today's webinar is brought to you by Teach a Man to Fish. We are an educational charity based in the United Kingdom, whose mission is to empower young people with the skills they need to succeed in life, in school, and in work. I won't go into too much detail about our work right now because you'll have plenty of opportunities to find out more during this webinar. This webinar, as you may know, is part of our webinar series on developing resilient young people. And webinar 1 was all about the growth mindset. If you didn't attend webinar 1, don't worry, I'll be doing a brief recap today, and the full recording is also available on YouTube. The link is here on this slide, and I'll be sharing it with you at the end of this webinar so you can go back and you can experience all of webinar 1. If you enjoyed today's webinar on supporting students to learn from mistakes, make sure you join us for webinar 3 on problem-solving tools and techniques. These webinars will be taking place over the coming weeks. Before we start today's webinar, I'd like to share a few sort of ground rules with you. Up until now, we've been doing the webinars through Google Meet, but this week we're trying out Zoom for the first time. We hope it will give you an even better experience. I just ask for your patience while I find my way around the platform. I might be a little bit slower than usual. You'll notice that you're all on mute at the moment. That's because we have 62 people in the room, so we can't all be talking at the same time. But don't worry, there'll be plenty of opportunities for you to interact with other participants during the webinar, I promise. So at regular points during the webinar, I'll ask questions which you can answer either via the poll, which appears on your screen, or via the text box, which some of you have been using already. If you have a question really specifically for me, I ask that you put it in the Q&A section, not in the chat box, because in the chat box I might miss it, and I'll be paying close attention to the Q&A section, and I'll be answering all of those questions as I go along. Let me check what's happening over with Facebook. Okay, that doesn't look like Facebook is working. Let me give it one more go. Let me try one more time so we can connect with our friends on Facebook. Let's see. Teach a Man to Fish. Okay, it looks like Facebook isn't responding. No problem. We'll just carry on as normal. So those were the ground rules for today's webinar. And now very briefly a little bit about me. My name's Christoph. I'm part of the Teach a Man to Fish team, and I work on our wonderful educational program called the School Enterprise Challenge. Again, I won't go into too much detail about the program right now because you'll have plenty of opportunities to find out about it. But to give you a quick overview, for those of you that don't know, the School Enterprise Challenge gives young people the chance to become entrepreneurs while still at school. They plan, set up, and run a real business. And in the process, of course, they develop skills in business, but they also develop a wide range of soft skills, such as communication, teamwork, problem solving, leadership, all the really important life skills, you name them, they can develop them through the School Enterprise Challenge. Now, before I get started with the content for today, I think it would be nice if you could all introduce yourselves as well. So I know some of you have done it already. For those of you that haven't, please let me know in the chat box your name, where you're from, and I can get a feel of who's joining us today and from what part of the globe. So I'll give you 20 seconds or so to just introduce yourselves in the chat box. I can see we've got lots of people coming in from India like we did yesterday, which is lovely. A few people from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nepal, Albania, as I said earlier. We've got someone here from South Africa, welcome. Lots more teachers from India and Nepal, great. Okay, so let's get started, and I'd like to look at what we'll be covering today. So the duration of today's webinar is approximately 1 hour. We're starting a little bit later than planned, but I'll try my best to keep it within that time. And we'll begin, as I said, with a recap on last week's topic, which was the growth mindset. We'll look at what is it and why is it important. We'll also look at the learning journey, which we looked at in webinar 1. And then we'll start getting stuck into today's topic, which is learning from mistakes. We'll flip mistakes on their head and look at them in a completely different way. And then there'll be some time where you, the teachers, can share your experiences. So this is when I'll bring some of you to the fore and I'll invite you to turn on your webcams and share your experiences. Then I'm going to share a practical tool which teachers can use directly in their classroom to support their students to learn from their mistakes. And then I'll be sharing a second tool with the same purpose. This is supposed to be a very practical session, and by the end you'll have 2 tools which you can use to help your students learn from their mistakes. And then finally, right at the end, I'll talk briefly about the School Enterprise Challenge, and I'll explain how it can create an environment in which students can learn from their mistakes. Now, onto certificates. All participants in this webinar will receive an attendance certificate when they complete the post-webinar survey. This is very important. So at the end in the chat box, I'll put a link. You need to click on that link. You need to give us feedback. It only takes 1 or 2 minutes. And then at the end, you'll be able to download your certificate. And it will be sent to your email address as well. Finally, the presentation slides and the resources which I mentioned in this presentation will all be shared after the webinar, and the recording will be made available on YouTube. Okay, so as I mentioned, the last webinar was all about the growth mindset and how it can help young people become more resilient. I'll do a very brief recap now to refresh our memories and bring those of us who weren't here up to speed. The growth mindset is a theory by Carol Dweck, who's an award-winning psychologist. And she argues there are 2 main types of learner mindsets: fixed mindset and growth mindset. Now, learners with a fixed mindset, they believe that their intelligence, their ability, and their talents are fixed traits. They cannot be changed. On the other hand, learners with a growth mindset, they believe that their intelligence, ability, and talents can be grown or developed through effort and through hard work. So that's a very brief recap on what you need to know about the growth mindset. If you'd like to find out more, you can watch the webinar number 1, which is all about this topic. It's on YouTube, and you can just click here. I'll share the link with you after this webinar. But for now, I think this is all you need to know. And I'd like to look again briefly at the learning journey, which we looked at in webinar 1. So in the last webinar, we looked at this diagram, which we've created here at Teach a Man to Fish. Specifically, we looked at the attitudes which learners need to be successful on the learning journey. And we said that having a growth mindset is at the foundation of a learning journey, as well as metacognition. So to recap, metacognition, as you can see here on the diagram on the bottom right-hand corner, metacognition is higher order thinking skills. It's the ability to reflect and learn from experience. Today, I want to look at the journey itself, so the ladder here. If you look at the ladder, starting from the bottom, you can see it involves trying, failing, trying again, struggling, relearning a skill, encountering an obstacle, overcoming the obstacle, and then succeeding. And then the learning journey continues upwards. So I'm sure you can see, to get through this, a learner has to be resilient, which is what this whole webinar series is about. And they need to do this because they'll have to struggle, they'll make mistakes, and they'll have failures, whatever you want to call it. To get to the success stage of the ladder, the learner needs to be capable of learning from the mistakes they make during that journey. If a learner makes a mistake and things don't turn out the way they had hoped, and they just say, I failed, and they give up, they'll never get to the success part. So we want to focus on how we can get them through all those mistakes and succeeding on their learning. So now we're on the topic of failures. I want to propose another way of looking at failure. And before I do this, I want to ask you all a question. Did any of you have the chance to watch the video which I shared in the description for this event? It's called Failure is Part of Success, and it's by an inspirational speaker called Eduardo Zanata. So please let me know via the poll which appears on your screen. I'll give you about 15 or 20 seconds to vote, so I can have an idea of who did and who didn't watch the video. Okay, so it seems like a small number of you, about a third, have watched the video, and about 2/3 of you haven't watched the video, which is absolutely fine. Don't worry if you haven't had the chance to watch it yet. The link is included in this presentation, and I'll invite, I'll share the link with you after this webinar. For now, I'd like to invite someone who did watch the video to discuss it with me. So I'd love to know, those of you that did watch the video, what did you think of it? Please let me know in the text box if you would like to come forward, and I'll invite one of you to share your thoughts with the rest of the group. Those of you that watched it, I'll give you 10 seconds or so to let me know in the text box, and I'll pick one of you to come forward. Hi, so Elizabeth says, don't quit too early, which we often do, and miss out on our chances to success. I think that's a really nice kind of key point from the video, Elizabeth. I'd love to invite you to share a little bit more with the rest of the group. So if that's okay with you, I'll promote you to panelist. And hi, Elizabeth, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, would you be willing to share with the rest of the group what you thought of the video and what your main sort of lessons from it were?
First of all, good evening to all. It's been a nice time since yesterday. I'm enjoying the session. The video is too beautiful. All the 3 key points that he discussed are very, very essential for us to be successful. The first and the foremost is that we quit too early. And that's why we often lose our chances of winning. We underestimate ourselves. We don't have the patience, the perseverance, to look into ourselves, to have that courage that I can, I will, I must. And we give up too early, and I feel that's the key point where we miss out our chances and the opportunities which are just outside our door.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I think that was one of my key takeaways as well, definitely. Okay, so I will put you back on mute, and I think I'd like to invite Sitapa as well, who had a nice contribution in the chat box. Sitapa, I'm promoting you to panelist, and I'd love for you to share with us your thoughts on the video.
Yeah, hi everyone out there. What I like most is the way it started, with a person telling that how many times he had lost, but eventually he had never given up. So yes, of course, I like the later part of the video, like as Elizabeth shared with us. But at the beginning itself gives you a kind of inspiration, that no matter what, we have at the end of, our endeavors, definitely something to look forward to and to learn. So yes, I feel that was quite encouraging, because the first thing that comes to mind is we just lose hope. Oh no, I mean, it's just lost. But to start all over again, trying, that is what is very important.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing, Sitapa. Thank you very much.
You for this topic.
I'll put you back on mute now. And thank you, Elizabeth and Sitapa, for sharing your thoughts on the video. And for those of you that haven't watched it yet, I really recommend after this webinar you go back and you watch it, because I think it will really change your perspective on what we currently think of as failure. And at Teach a Man to Fish, there's a little saying which we think is really, really useful when thinking about failure. And I'm going to share it with you now. We say that fail just stands for first attempt in learning. Now let that sink in a little bit, but at Teach a Man to Fish, we say that fail is just the first attempt in learning. As Eduardo says in the video, we give up too early. We don't succeed because as soon as we have a failure, we give up. And we believe that actually failure is just the first step on the way to success. So that's why we've turned this acronym around, and that's kind of our philosophy here. So now, I'd like to invite you, the teachers, the educators who are in the classroom every single day, to share your stories of how you support your own students to learn from their mistakes and from their failures. So if you have a story or a technique, maybe a tool that you use, or maybe the story of one individual student who you think has learned from their mistakes in an amazing way, let me know in the text box, and I'll invite you to become a panelist like Elizabeth was just then, and Sonata, and you can share with the rest of the group. So I'll give you 10 or 20 seconds or so to put yourself forward if you would like. Okay, so Misted, always very engaged in the webinars. I'll go and find you now, and I'll promote you to panelist. Hi, Misted, how are you?
I'm very fine. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing well, thank you. Tell us about your experience of supporting students to learn from mistakes.
Yeah, actually, that's quite good. Thank you very much for giving me this platform. I was actually an examination class teacher last year when I was teaching my 7th grade for the National Public Examination in Zimbabwe. One of my students last year, when we were using the team teaching style, he had challenges in his learning, and actually the school had opted to say he was not supposed to sit down for the national examination. It was so distressful. So I had to sit down with the parents and try to encourage them that the child was not all that dull, but he needed to be given excess time so that he could catch up on his areas of weaknesses. So I had to take him one-on-one. And I had to, as a psychologist, I had to go down through him to say, no, you look, boy, you still have the chance. You can do better than all of them in the class. And the child started to have, more motivation on himself. It was intrinsic to say per se. So after all, we had only 6 months. We had to actually go down straight to the book one-on-one with the teacher. And it was so amazing that he started to show a lot of developmental, signs before the examination. And eventually he wrote the final public examination and he passed more than those ones who were actually called the regulars. And saying failure is the first attempt in learning is very true. He used to fail, but now he's at a better school in Zimbabwe and the parents are actually very happy. I got a very good surprise and a very good golden handshake to say, Chris, I'm very happy about it. This is something that I needed to share with you as a team.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ed. So I think you're approaching it from a sort of psychology angle, pardon me, and you suggested kind of going one-on-one with that student and making it clear to them that they have lots of potential. And I think a few people in the chat are agreeing with you, saying that for students who are giving up too early, some one-on-one time, if you can afford it, can have a really, really positive impact.
That's very true.
Rajana says, this is really inspiring my students towards accepting their mistakes inside the classroom. First attempt in learning. Divya as well says she has a good one. You have to give them the confidence that they need to try again and the power of not yet. So for those of you which weren't in the webinar yesterday, I recommend you go back and watch a recording because we discussed a brilliant video which talks about the power of not yet. Just because you can't do something now doesn't mean you won't be able to do it in the future. So not seeing something which is a challenge now as just giving up because you'll never be able to do it. Instead, understanding maybe I can't do it now, but if I work at it, if I persevere, if I have a growth mindset, I can do it in the future. So thank you very much for sharing, Ms. Stead. So moving on, earlier we saw that on the learning journey ladder, making mistakes is an essential part of the learning process. But we have to admit that it's also quite uncomfortable to live with. No one really likes to make a mistake. No one wants to be wrong. So, there are lots of things we can do to create an environment for our students to learn from their mistakes. You're all teachers here, and I'm sure obviously Mr. Ed contributed, but I'm sure you all have plenty of techniques for this, your own little tricks that you have. In this webinar, I want to share 2 practical tools which we find really useful here at Teach a Man to Fish, and which you can easily use in your classroom to help your learners learn from their mistakes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly introduce the first tool, and then we can discuss it as a group. And then I'll introduce the second tool, and then once again we can discuss it as a group. I hope that sounds good to you. So the first tool I'd like to look at is called the gallery walk. Before I explain anything, I want to know if this name rings a bell to you at all. So I'm going to start a poll, and I want to know, have any of you heard of the gallery walk before? I'll give you 15 or 20 seconds to let me know if this sounds familiar or not, so I can understand where we're all at. Meanwhile, while you're voting, I'd like to say thank you to all of those who are contributing in the chat. You're sharing your tips and your techniques to encourage students to learn from mistakes. Lots of you saying patience is so important, and appreciating students and praising their failures as well as their successes is very important, and I completely agree with you. Okay, so most of you have voted. About 40% of you say that you have heard of it, some of you haven't heard of it, and a small portion of you are unsure whether you've heard of it, and that's absolutely fine. Maybe you have heard of it, maybe you even use it, you just know it from a different name. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run through it with you. And I'm going to give you a brief overview of what it is, and I'm going to discuss the learning objectives as well. We'll have a brief look at which subjects this can be used in, and we'll look at the duration, how long it takes to do the gallery walk. We'll also look at the equipment you'll need, and then finally I'll share some instructions for you, the teacher, and I'll also share some ground rules which I think are key to making this activity a success with the students. So, looking at the overview. The gallery walk is a very simple discussion technique that encourages learners to get up out of their chairs and to walk around the classroom, either in pairs or in small groups, and they look at information which you've stuck up on the walls, like if they were viewing art at a gallery. That's why we call it the gallery walk. So learning objective is giving and receiving feedback. So as teachers, you know, you're very well practiced giving and receiving feedback. You do it on a daily basis with all of your students, I'm sure. But the students themselves, possibly this is not something they're so used to. So that's the learning objective for this particular activity. In terms of subjects, it's suitable for any subject, and I really mean any subject, whether it's maths, English, art, science, history, philosophy, foreign languages, whatever you teach, you can use this technique, and it will become clear why in a moment. The duration is, you know, we've kept it quite short. You can probably do it in just 30 minutes as part of an already existing activity. Let me explain what I mean by this. And I'm going to take English class as an example. Recently we had Earth Day, International Earth Day, and I know some English teachers, for example, encourage their students to write short poems about planet Earth to celebrate Earth Day. So the students write their poems. As well as writing the poems, you could do a gallery walk. You could put the poems up on the walls around the classroom and get the students to get up in pairs or in groups and discuss the poems and give and receive feedback. So that's a practical application of the gallery walk. And I'll share some instructions in a moment, but first I want to look at equipment. The equipment you'll need is quite minimal. You'll need some pens and pieces of paper to put up on the walls. And of course, don't forget the pieces of work themselves, whatever they might be, the maths project, the English project, the art project. You put them up on the wall, you put pieces of paper next to them. You might even want to have post-its or stickers to make it a bit more colorful, to bring it to life. I think this is particularly important with younger students, to keep them engaged, make it really visual. If you don't have post-its or stickers, don't worry, you can still do this activity. Now, you have an idea of how this will look, but let's go in a bit more detail. Let's look at the instructions and some of the ground rules you'll need to make this a success. So I've put some suggested instructions here. Firstly, you'll need to explain to students that they will be reviewing each other's work. This might be a little bit daunting. some students maybe are not used to this happening so publicly, so you'll have to be quite careful how you set this task. You'll have to make them feel comfortable from the beginning. I think you need to make it clear that the idea is to give feedback that will help people feel good about their effort and build their confidence. But it must also point them in the right direction to make improvements. That's very important. The gallery walk is about praise, and it's also about elevation and improvement. So those are some instructions. And of course, you know, I'll share the slides afterwards so you have these all in one place. And I've also come up with a few ground rules that we like to use here at Teach a Man to Fish. So the first one is be kind. Feedback doesn't just mean criticism. You know, I think this is a common misconception. People think that feedback is just pointing out what was wrong with something. We like to flip it on its head here, and we recommend always starting with a positive piece of feedback, commenting on first on something that was really good about the piece of work. So that's the first ground rule, being kind. The second ground rule is being specific. It's very important to be kind, but it doesn't help if you're not specific. So, for example, saying that John's work is good is nice, but it's not really helpful to John. I recommend, you know, explaining what is good about John's work so that John in the future is very clear about what he did well on this piece of work and what he should take forward into other pieces of work. So that's the second rule, be specific. And finally, be helpful. So when you are pointing out something which could be improved, explain how it could be improved. I think it's very important to not just say, I don't like this or this isn't good, but offer some pointers or some guidance as to how it could be improved. And if you're not sure exactly how it could be improved, you just know that it needs to be improved, why not work with that person whose work it is to think of some questions they could ask themselves to figure it out for themselves. So those are just a few ground rules which are taken from a book, an online guide called Work That Matters, the Teacher's Guide to Project-Based Learning. It's by Alec Patton. It's a great resource that is free to download. So I've included the link at the end of this presentation, and I invite you after the webinar to go and check it out. You can download it for free, and it has loads of useful activities like this on project-based learning. But for now, moving on, we know that we want students to gain skills in being able to evaluate each other's work in, you know, a detailed and analytical way. And for some students, particularly young students, this might be challenging. So I've come up with some sentences which I think you can equip them with to help them with this process of giving and receiving feedback. So let's go through them together now. The first one is, what works well? What impresses you about it? What do you like the most about it? What does not work well, and how would you improve it? Finally, what is missing? So if students are struggling to evaluate each other's work, you can maybe put these sentences on the board and they can refer back to them and they can use them when they're doing the activity. The feedback could either be written directly on the piece of work, which is up on the wall, or you can have pieces of paper around it and they can write on those, or they can use post-it notes. If you don't want it to involve writing, maybe the feedback can be given orally directly to the person whose work it is. So maybe they could stand up next to their piece of work and they could receive the feedback from everyone. Of course, the students must remember the ground rules, which are be kind, be specific, be helpful. On this note, I mentioned earlier that we encourage starting with a positive piece of feedback. That's very, very important. Some people go as far as saying as you should also finish on a positive note. So you may want to consider what we call the feedback sandwich, putting nice comments either side of some constructive feedback in the middle. Some people think this is a really good feedback technique. It's up to you whether you want to encourage this in your classroom. Here at Teach a Man to Fish, in the context of a school business, particularly for people taking part in the School Enterprise Challenge, we think that the gallery walk can be used at almost every stage of the business planning process. Now, let me give you an example so you can sort of imagine how that might work. Imagine your team is about to launch their product. Let's say they're making candles out of recycled waste matter. They need to design some packaging so they can sell it to their customers. They can't just hand over the candles. They need to be wrapped in something. And yeah, they need to design some packaging. Why not design many prototypes of packaging and then do a gallery walk with the whole team to decide on the best one? This would be a nice way of having multiple options and picking as a group which is our favorite. And I'm sure you can see from this example that learning how to give and receive feedback is also a great way of developing critical thinking skills and communication skills. So it's a really well-rounded activity in terms of skills development. Okay, that's everything I have to say about the gallery walk. And now I'd like to invite you to share your thoughts on this tool. So in the chat box, I'd like to invite everybody to tell me what you think about the gallery walk. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Have you used it before? Would you consider using it in the future? Just write this in the box and let me know what you think of the gallery walk. I can see that Neha Gol said that they had used it before, but they didn't know it under this name. So yeah, we haven't invented anything completely new. This is a technique that exists, and the gallery walk is just one name for it, but maybe you knew it as something else. Elizabeth says she did something of this kind with her math class, which is great to hear. Elizabeth, if I take you off mute, would you be willing to tell us how you used it in your maths class?
Yes, I'll be happy to do that.
Go ahead.
Well, I did something like this, similar to this in my math class for grade 7 when I was teaching them about the bar graph. And before I could start with the lesson, I told the children, I gave them pieces of paper to each one, and explained about mind mapping. And I told them that whatever I'm going to explain and teach you during the course of the lesson, you have to jot that down in the creative manner that appeals to you the most, and express yourself as to what you have understood and what have you taken back. So as I was teaching, the children were busy making their own notes in the mind map form, diagrammatically, as creative as possible. Once I finished with the lesson, they were asked to come forward and show their mind maps to the class and to explain what they had jotted down. The students came forward, they put forth their points, and in the course of this, they understood that there were many points which they had missed out. There were some points which they had incorrectly written. That is, they had misinterpreted what I had said. So it was a learning where there was a give and share as they were putting forth their points and showing their mind map to the class. They were getting feedback from their peers. And it was a beautiful session where each one learned from the other. And in the end, I may ask them to put it on the notice board for all of them to have a look at it and learn from one another. So it was a beautiful session. I think it is something similar to the gallery walk that you are talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So that's a very good example of how it was used in a maths class from Elizabeth. And I can see lots of people are saying in the chat that they've also been using it. Ridula says she uses it in business studies. What else do we have? Tulsi says this is an amazing method that suits today's topic really well. And I'm really glad you say that. I noticed that Divya had some interesting thoughts as well, and I'd like to invite her to share her, her feelings on the gallery walk. Divya, how are you? Oh, Divya, I can't seem to hear you. Let me go back to the text box. Deepa says it includes maximum participation of students and improves learning in an easy and effective way. So if we can't hear Divya, maybe we can have Deepa instead sharing their thoughts. Let me take you off mute. It's just taking one moment to come through. We seem to be struggling to unmute Deepa. Let me pick somebody else instead. Vanika says, in economics, I used it for whether HDI is a better parameter to know a country or MPI. That sounds really interesting. Sorry, I'm going to try and unmute you. Vanika, let me unmute you. Vanika, can you hear us? Lots of people saying they really like the gallery walk and it's a great way of engaging lots of students. I'm trying to bring Vanika in and Deepa, but we seem to be having some technical issues. So I'll just move on for now because we have another tool which we need to cover. And I really want to try and finish on time if possible. So let me introduce the next tool, which is the Learning from Mistakes Spectrum. So this is a framework which the Teach a Man to Fish team in South Africa has adapted from the work of Professor Amy Edmondson. And she's a professor of leadership at the Harvard Business School. And we hope that this spectrum can be used both by teachers and by students to understand where mistakes occur in the learning process. So we've done this because we believe that if you understand where and why mistakes happen, it's easier to take the necessary actions to rectify them. So I've brought the spectrum here on screen. And the important thing in understanding where and why mistakes happen is that we're not trying to put blame for these mistakes. We are just trying to identify them so that we can think critically about them and agree on a way forward. And what this framework is very useful for is clearly showing that mistakes can happen in lots of different places. Now, let's look at it in more detail. I know this can appear quite small on your screen, so I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. And for those of you that are joining on your phone, you can use your fingers to enlarge it. Hopefully you can see it a little bit better, and across the top, you can see there are 9 main types of mistakes or issues which are described. Now, I won't go through them in detail, but broadly speaking, the ones on the left are easily avoidable. And the ones on the right are ones which make us learn and make us grow. So let me explain that a little bit. Let's take an example on the left-hand side where we've said that these are easily preventable. You know, for example, not following the guidelines or not paying attention. These are really easily preventable. If the students become conscious that this is where they are making mistakes, they can take their own steps to ensure that this doesn't happen in the future, and they can feel empowered to take ownership of their own learning. So that's the left-hand side. If we look to the right, things like hypothesis testing, where a student says, I think this might work, or even exploratory testing, which is one level above, where a student says, I want to try this out and see what happens. Well, these are much more conscious ways of making mistakes. And the learner knows that they probably won't get it right, but they understand that this is how they will learn. So, yeah, I won't go through it all because we don't have, in a full day teacher training, we would look at every single one in a lot of detail. Today, I just want to flag a few things and explain how the spectrum works. So on the first row, we have issues or mistakes. And on the second row, we have behaviors and attitudes. And finally, at the bottom, we have solutions, what we can do about it. And some teachers have asked me in previous webinars, do I do this from left to right or from top to bottom? I recommend consuming the information in columns from top to bottom. So identifying what the issue is and what behavior it's associated with, and then looking at the bottom for the solution. And bear in mind that any learner can make any mistake on the spectrum. It's not like if a learner tends to make blue mistakes, they'll never make an orange mistake. That's not the case. You can make mistakes anywhere on the spectrum at any time. So hopefully this is a good visualization of where and why mistakes happen. Now, let's have a look at how we can use this tool. This tool can be used by teachers to guide their own teaching and to support students to learn from their mistakes. So some teachers might want to print it and put it in their teaching notebook, or maybe even put it on their desk or up on the wall. One level up from that is sharing it with the students themselves. For those of you which were here yesterday, we spoke a lot about metacognition. thinking about thinking, reflecting on how we learn. And this is a great tool for students to reflect on how they learn. So if you think your students would benefit from this, you can also share it with them. And it's great for developing metacognition. So that's the learning from mistake spectrum. I know I went through it very quickly. That's because I want to allow time for us to discuss it as a group. So now in the text box, please tell me what your thoughts are on this spectrum, and I'll invite some of you to come forward and share your experiences. Varsha says, hi, very effective session. Thank you very much. I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on the learning from mistakes spectrum. I'll bring it back up on the screen so that we can all have it in front of us while we talk about it. Mridula says, great going, and she's learning here, which is great. Would anybody like to be taken off mute and share with the rest of the group maybe how they could imagine using this spectrum? Tulsi says, seems very systematic but still confused. Okay, so Tulsi, let me take you off mute and maybe we can chat about it very briefly. Hi Tulsi, I've taken you off mute. So what are your thoughts on the learning from mistakes spectrum?
Namaste, good evening to everyone.
Hi.
Okay, I'm very thankful to you for your beautiful presentation. But regarding this spectrum, so I'm still somehow confused.
Mm-hmm.
So the issues column is over there, attitude column is over there, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And what can I do about it column is also over there.
Mm-hmm.
So at the top again, mistakes which are easily avoidable, and right hand side, mistakes which we learn and grow from had been mentioned there. So still I'm confused. So from which angle we have to understand and make teachers as well as students understandable.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tulsi. And as I said, I went through it so quickly because we don't have much time today. So it's normal to be confused. I just wanted to have it here in a brief introduction, but I would expect that everyone here would have to take this and sit down with it and really read it from beginning to end and imagine how they might use it. It's completely normal to be confused at this stage. Nakib says, this gives ownership to the learners and they take responsibility for their learning. So I'd love to take Nakib off mute and allow them to maybe expand on that and explain to us how they could imagine using this spectrum.
Okay.
Nakib.
Hello, Christoph.
Hi.
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you so much. Yes, when you put the spectrum and hand it over to the learner is going to go look at it and say, where did he make the mistake? And it gives them the responsibility to take the ownership and correct and see what he needs to do to correct it, rather than the teacher or somebody pointing it out to the learner. So here this gives the responsibility and it takes out the stigma where sometimes the child may be shy, not knowing where is he not getting it right. So I think it's a very good tool where learning is now in the hands of the students. So they
Mm,
know what to do, where they've gone wrong, and they can correct it. And when they need help, they have, they can actually have the courage to come and approach the teacher, or they could see how they can get it corrected. So there's going to be no, they don't have to be scared about being judged by the others, because learners do feel judged, and because of which that creates fear in them, and they don't approach. Thank you.
thank you very much, Nikib. I love what you said there, removing stigma. And I think that's a big part of creating a nice environment where people can make mistakes and then in turn they can learn from them. So I really like that you use that word, removing stigma. I saw in the chat, in the corner of my eye, Redmi had some interesting thoughts as well. So I'm taking Redmi off mute, and I'd love to invite them as well to contribute. Actually, I'm not sure if Redmi is their name or maybe just the name of their phone, but I'm taking them off mute now. Oh, and it looks like Neja wants to say something as well. So maybe we can take you off mute as well, Neja.
Hi, Christoph. This is Nirja, and I am the academic head of a school here in India. While this entire spectrum looks amazing, my question to you is more about how do you deal with children? And this is not just a teaching learning issue. So when I have currently just dealt with a child who has a major behavioral problem. He's an extremely intelligent boy, but he's always putting himself into trouble. And I think I can say that I can put him under, if I have to, use the spectrum, I would say hypothesis testing is where I would use to see, what kind of thing would work with him. But my question to you is, how do you know for issues other than academic teaching learning, if this spectrum can be used effectively?
Okay, thank you very much, Neja. So first of all, I won't claim to be sort of a behavioral expert. I think what you've pointed out is quite correct, that this spectrum here is quite focused on sort of academia, academic performance, and to the left we do have more sort of behavioral things, but it is more their sort of academic behavior rather than getting into trouble and things like that. We spoke earlier about the power of going one-to-one. So we said, many teachers said if a student's, giving up too early, taking them one-to-one is a great way of kind of motivating them. And I think with behavioral issues, it's absolutely essential to go one-to-one as well. And I'm sure you have done already with this student. But what this tool encourages is to really sit down with the young person and just showing them that their behavior, their actions has consequences for them. Sometimes people don't associate just what their behavior then leads on to. And you just said it yourself, a student is very, very bright, they're very good, but they're getting themselves into trouble. And I think they're basically at the sort of non-conformance or inattention end of the spectrum, aren't they? They're not lack of ability, they're just not going along with what they should be doing. And you can maybe try and frame it to them that that's what's stopping them from progressing. Does that help at all? Thanks, Neja. Okay, so thank you everyone who contributed in the chat and those who came forward and spoke a little bit about the learning from mistakes spectrum. Now we're approaching the end of the webinar. It's nearly time for us to wrap up, but before we do, I'd like to briefly recap on how the School Enterprise Challenge by us here at Teach a Man to Fish can be a great way for students to learn from their mistakes. I'll leave some time for questions right at the end, but for now, I'd like to go on to the School Enterprise Challenge. And before I say anything about it, I'd like to do another poll with you. And I'd like to ask you, have you ever taken part in the School Enterprise Challenge? Let me know by clicking on your screen, yes or no. That way we can know if we have many School Enterprise Challenge teachers or not. While people are voting, I'd like to read a really insightful comment from Nagamani Mustur. They say, I am also connecting the gallery walk to this tool, the Learning from Mistakes Spectrum, which is actually making the kids know their strengths and areas of improvements by themselves. Absolutely. The reason we've brought these two tools together is they can work really well in unison. So thank you for pointing that out, Naga. I think that's great. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll now. I'll share the results with you. About 40% of you have taken part in SEG before, and 60% of you haven't. And not to worry, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about it now. The School Enterprise Challenge is a free educational program which is run by us, Teach a Man to Fish, and we think it's a great platform to develop a growth mindset. To learn from mistakes and to develop a growth mindset. The program takes participants, which in this case is students and teachers, on an entrepreneurial journey, and a real one at that. So they start by coming up with their very own business idea, they write their own business plan, and then the most exciting part, they launch and run a real business, which means, you know, creating a real product or products and real services and selling them for real money to real people. And I think that's really, really important. So how is it a great platform from learning from mistakes? I'd like to highlight 3 things which I think are key. Firstly, it's a student-led program. Although teachers are there to support the students to plan, set up, and run their business, if done correctly, it should be the students who are really leading on the whole process. And this will expose our student entrepreneurs to real-life situations which will provide them with opportunities to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. It's just not the same as being in the classroom. This is much more practical and will open up many more opportunities to make mistakes. The second point is that there is no single correct way of setting up a business. It's not like academic teaching where maybe there's a right answer and a wrong answer. It's not yes or no. You know, what works for a team of students setting up a handicrafts business over in India might not work for a team of students setting up vegetable farming in Tanzania, for example. So these are very real situations. They vary case by case, and you know, there'll be plenty of opportunities to make mistakes and learn from them. You can't just copy, and it's not black and white whether it's yes or no, which I think leads itself very well to today's topic. And finally, setting up a successful business is hard. You know, we knew that when we designed the School Enterprise Challenge. It's specifically made to challenge its participants, to push their abilities. We're asking young people who are still at school, you know, they could be 8, 9, 10 years old and setting up a business. Normally people are adults when they do this, but we think, why not bring it earlier, challenge them, and create this environment where they can make mistakes and learn from them, whilst, you know, it's still safe. Their teachers are here to support them. It's not a matter of, you know, making it or not making it. They can fail and they can try again. So that's all I'll say about the School Enterprise Challenge for now. You can find out more on our website, which I've put here on the screen. There's everything about it, including how you can register. Obviously, during COVID, many schools are closed. but we've decided to keep registration open. It's completely free to register. And if you register now, maybe you can familiarize yourself with what it's all about. And once your school reopens, you can maybe launch it in your school. So I encourage you to do that. Now, if, you know, that's it for today. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to write them down, and I'll be happy to take your questions. But for now, let me point you in the direction of some useful resources. We have the recording of webinar number 1 available here on the left, and we have the inspirational video by Eduardo Zanata here on the right. If you haven't watched it already, please go and watch it. I mentioned briefly when I was talking about the gallery walk, a resource called Work That Matters, The Teacher's Guide to Project-Based Learning by Alec Patton. It's a wonderful free online resource. The link to download it is just here. And what you've all been waiting for, the certificate, all you need to do is fill out the survey. Let me pull up the link now and put it in the text box. Let me put it here. Please take this survey to get your attendance certificate. And one important thing, you'll be asked for your email address. Please make sure you put the correct email address, because that's the email address which the certificate will then be sent to. So if you want to receive your certificate, please enter the correct email address. That's very, very important. Naga says, please can you give the link for project-based learning too? Yes, absolutely. It's here on the presentation, and I'll be sending the slides to everyone here by email this afternoon. So you'll have it in your inbox and you can download this wonderful guide, which has loads of tips and tricks on PBL, project-based learning. Let me see if we have any more questions. Nehas says, thank you to all the panelists for such a wonderful session. Absolutely, I agree with you. Anju says, as we all know, due to the pandemic, online classes are going on. Please tell us how we can collaborate School Enterprise Challenge activities. So, you know, for those of you which are already taking part in the School Enterprise Challenge and who are registered and who want to take, you know, who want to continue taking part, we encourage you to find creative ways of taking this online. I've already had teachers from all over the world send me their students' business plans and tell me, my kids did this all online. They collaborated through Google Hangouts and they came up with this, which is incredible. So I encourage you to do this. Obviously, you can't meet in person, but you can still do it online. For those of you which aren't registered yet, I recommend you do register yourself. You've got this period of school closures as a teacher to familiarize yourself. We have loads of educational resources on there. We have business guides, we have videos, we have loads of games, everything. So go and check it out so that when your school reopens, you can tell your students all about it and you can hit the ground running. Okay. Lots of people saying thank you very much. Thank you. Let me remind you that in order to get your attendance certificate, you need to do the survey. So I'm putting the link one more time so that you have it. Somebody asked, where can we read more on the framework? So I have to be honest, this is something we've developed quite recently at Teach Mantifish. Just last year, we worked on it. So this is what we have for now on the learning from mistakes spectrum. But if there's enough interest, if people want to learn more about the spectrum, you can just email us. I'll bring up our contact details now. You can email us and we can do a whole webinar just about the learning from mistakes spectrum. I went through it so quickly today. I'd be happy to talk about it in a lot more detail. Okay, so we've gone a little bit over time. It's been a wonderful session. I'm going to thank you for the last time today. Thank you so much for your contributions. You guys have been amazing. You've been so active and sharing your stories directly from your classroom. I think you really brought it to life. I certainly learned a lot. I hope you did too. Stay connected with us. Make sure you take the survey, and we look forward to seeing you in webinar number 3, where we'll be looking at problem-solving tools and techniques. Thank you very much, everyone, and bye for now.